And now, a passage from Baja, California after Walker, The Zerman Enterprise by Eugene Keith Chamberlin. During the later months of the Revolution of Ayutla, Juan Alvarez and Ignacio Comonfort were led by their meager resources to listen to foreign offers of aid. One of the eager volunteers was Jean-Napoleon Zerman, an old soldier of fortune then residing in San Francisco. Without authority to do so but pressed by a short-term contract with Alvarez, San Francisco agents of the revolutionary government placed Zerman in charge of delivering a shipload of war supplies to Acapulco. As a condition for undertaking the task, Zerman forced the agents to grant him broad powers. He then stretched this authority to undertake a blockade of Mexican Pacific coastal ports loyal to Santa Ana. In trying to carry out this purely personal project, he sailed into the harbor of La Paz, Baja, California, where memories of William Walker's abortive filibuster of 2 years earlier were still sharp. Military Governor Jose Maria Blancart considered Zerman an invader of the same type and forced him to surrender. The party was then mistreated, taken to the mainland, and marched to Guadalajara. Eventually, all were sent to Mexico City for trial on the charge of filibustering. The unsettled situation of the Republic contributed to slow action in the courts. Only on November 25, 1857, more than 2 years after his arrest in La Paz, did the Mexican Supreme Court finally acquit Zerman of the charge. Even then, the affair was unsettled, for the War of the Reform and the French Intervention and Second Empire prevented judgment of damage claims filed by Zerman and his party. These were disposed of in 1876, and the case was closed. For half a century after the settlement of damage claims, there was no investigation of the expedition. When J. Fred Rippey, in 1926, looked into it, he concurred with the Mexican courts, but he did not, apparently, delve deeply into the affair. In 1940, however, a Mexican author revived the charge of filibustering and published a series of letters and an affidavit from the period to support his contention. A second Mexican author in 1950 published a series of selections touching on the history of Baja California. In several places, he refers to Zerman as a filibuster. No investigator has yet, it seems, placed the events of the expedition in their context. The present examination of the available materials leads to the conclusion that controversy over Zerman's intentions has arisen from this failure, for only in the light of attitudes and events contemporary with the enterprise can the origin, development, outcome, and aftermath of the expedition be judged. Keeping these in mind, there is little reason to continue to classify the activities of Zerman as a filibustering venture. Two major factors which clearly affected the outcome of Zerman's enterprise were the long-standing fear of Yankee manifest destiny, especially among Mexican conservatives, and the contemporary filibuster raids on the West Coast. Both were intensified by the instability which accompanied the Ayutla revolt. The danger from filibustering was increased, also by the weak defensive situation of the Pacific region of Mexico. These joined to create a very difficult problem for the rebels, for by mid-1855, Alvarez and Comonfort knew well that any dealing with foreigners was bound to result in a powerful outcry from the conservatives. Yet they had to risk this denunciation in order to strengthen their forces for an invasion of the Valley of Mexico. Though they might have been tempted under other circumstances to accept more of the aid so freely offered, the leaders confined their agreements to purchase of supplies. Santa Ana endangered their plans, for when he suddenly fled the country in August, he accused the Ayutla government of accepting aid from filibusters to overthrow his regime. In the turmoil resulting from the dictator's flight in this parting blast, copies appeared in September of a so-called protectorate treaty allegedly arranged by the rebels with the United States. The filibuster danger in the West is abundantly clear. In addition to Walker's invasion, the area witnessed the expeditions of Pindre, Rauset, and Crabbe. Sonora, in September 1855, came under control of General Manuel Maria Gondara, who was soon in revolt against Alvarez and able to keep the state in turmoil throughout the period of Zerman's expedition. General Miguel Blanco and the conservatives similarly kept Sinaloa in disorder until early in November 1855, the month after Zerman's arrival at La Paz. Seemingly, the only force in the West loyal to Alvarez and capable of significant defensive activity was that under General Jose Maria Yanez around Mazatlan. Of all the Mexican West, however, Baja California, as usual, remained most vulnerable. In spite of the lessons of the War of 1846 to 48 and the near loss of the area to Walker's bandits, little had been done to strengthen peninsular defenses. A weak military colony with a token force was established at Santo Tomas in the northern frontier zone in 1849, and a few soldiers were at La Paz when Walker's filibusters arrived in 1853. But as in the war with the United States, it had been the ranchero warriors who had defeated the invaders and forced the retreat to Ensenada. In withdrawing, Walker had taken with him both Governor Rafael Espinoza and his intended successor Juan C. Rebolledo, leaving the capital almost without military leaders. Yanez soon sent a few troops from the mainland, but no significant force garrisoned the city until early in 1854. At the time of Walker's invasion, Santa Anna was trying to consolidate his position by negotiating with Gadsden and by rewarding his own adherents. One of his supporters, Jose Maria Blancart, had been a hat maker in Guadalajara during the lean years under Herrera and Arista. On July 26, 1852, Blancart had proclaimed the Plan de Jalisco, which helped ensure Santa Anna's last return to power, but had to wait until the end of 1853 before receiving his reward, the governorship of Baja California, with the rank of general. Though Blancart twice tried to decline the appointment on the grounds that he was not fitted for military command, Santa Anna insisted, and in January 1854, Blancart was on his way to La Paz. Shortly before he reached the city, Espinoza and Rebolledo escaped from Ensenada and made their way back to the capital, bearing tales of Walker's determination to gain control of the peninsula. The two escapees and the local rancheros were readily available to warn the new governor of his danger in case Walker should return to La Paz. If Blancart was truly as unqualified as he had insisted, his 3-year tenure as governor must have been quite difficult. After sending the ex-hat maker to the peninsula, Santa Anna ignored him, and Blancart became bitter. When the Ayutla revolt began, he remained neutral until September 6, 1855, when he declared his adherence to Alvarez. Though concerned for the fate of the peninsula in case of another filibuster invasion, many liberals viewed Blancart's conversion with deep skepticism and were unwilling to send reinforcements to La Paz. By October, the territorial economy was in a desperate state, for long disruption of trade had almost ruined local merchants. The governor's fear of invasion, however, led him to proclaim a forced loan of 12 million pesos to keep the loyalty of his garrison unpaid for many months. A Mazatlan observer just before Zerman's arrival believed that the peninsula was on the verge of rebellion. In spite of conflicting accounts of Zerman's life before 1855, there is abundant evidence of an adventurous career. Zerman was born in Venice in 1790 of Alsatian or Corsican parents, and his father served under Napoleon. Captured by the British, young Jean Napoleon spent some time on a London prison ship. He fought at Waterloo as a lieutenant of French Marines and won the Legion of Honor. After the Napoleonic Wars, he campaigned in Greece and throughout the Mediterranean and Europe, combining undercover work for Louis Philippe with service to the Pope. He was ruined by the rise of Louis Napoleon, and therefore spent the latter 1840s in the United States, participating in Scott's march upon Mexico City. After the war, he settled down with his family in San Francisco, opening an office near the waterfront to deal in ship ballast. Among the Mexicans in the city at the time was Jose Maria Parra y Alvarez, a 23-year-old nephew of General Juan Alvarez. At the outbreak of the Revolution of Ayutla, he went to Acapulco to offer his services. While there, Comonfort showed him a letter from Roderick Matheson of San Francisco, who offered to furnish the rebels with an armed ship in return for a grant to some of the public lands in the state of Guerrero. Alvarez had decided to accept, and the nephew was sent back in May 1855 to obtain the vessel, as well as money and supplies for the armies. Arranging for the supplies was relatively simple, with many businessmen, including Zerman, offering aid. It proved almost impossible, however, to secure a competent person to deliver the vessel to Alvarez. The nephew consequently asked Zerman to take command. Though eager to return to his accustomed activities, the aged adventurer hesitated because he doubted the agent's authority to hire him. Parra y Alvarez, meanwhile, tried to get together an all-Mexican crew from the local colony by advertising in San Francisco papers, but failed completely. Since his commission was about to expire, he returned to Acapulco in July to obtain an extension and report on progress. With him, he took 2 letters from Zerman to Alvarez dated June 15th and 30th, outlining 3 proposals. Jean Napoleon offered first to obtain and deliver the supplies. Secondly, he suggested that he charter ships and blockade West Coast ports held by Santa Anna's forces. Lastly, he would obtain ships and bring them to Acapulco for use as Alvarez might wish. The general replied on August 4th, a week before Santa Anna's sudden flight, that he had transferred the supplies contract to Matheson and that the second proposal was unwise, for it would divert manpower from the campaign in central Mexico. However, he found the third suggestion interesting and asked for specific terms before granting authority to proceed. His failure emphatically to decline all 3 offers encouraged Zerman to attach himself to the enterprise. By his contract, Matheson was named resident commissioner of the Mexican provisional government with the rank of General de División. He was to deliver between 50,000 and 100,000 pesos in money, munitions, and supplies to Acapulco not later than September 24th, 1855, upon which date the contract would be canceled if not already fulfilled. By the time the contract reached San Francisco, not more than 6 weeks remained to complete the commission. Matheson arranged a partnership with 3 other San Franciscans, Robert, Noah, and La Chapelle, got the cargo together and chartered the Archibald Gracie. The crew problem was solved finally by hiring a mixed group of Americans and Frenchmen, 1 Mexican and 1 Englishman. Pressed by lack of time and probably by Zerman's mounting eagerness, the partners hired him on his own terms to deliver the ship. On September 17th, in the name of Alvarez, they commissioned him an admiral in the Mexican Navy with full civil and military powers to close Mexican ports not adhering to the plan of Ayutla and the provisional government. Even then, 3 weeks passed before the expedition was ready to sail. These numerous violations of the contract seem most logically explained by the fact that after 4 months of expending effort and money to obtain the cargo and ship, Matheson had an investment to protect and was desperate lest he should lose heavily by failure. However one may question the judgment of the investors in exceeding their authority, it is quite another matter to accuse them of acting in bad faith or of intentionally fostering a filibustering expedition. The long negotiations were carried on openly, and the nature of the enterprise appears to have been widely known in San Francisco. Parra y Alvarez advertising for an all-Mexican crew gave the venture adequate publicity. The rounding up of the final 85-man crew was certainly not done in secret. A recent Mexican writer insists that most of the men had flocked to San Francisco in hopes of joining Walker, but had been left behind by his sudden departure for Nicaragua. Though no evidence is presented to support this assertion, which appears quite possible for such an enterprise as this, even the presence of an adventure-bent crew would not necessarily make this a filibustering expedition. A venture into hostile waters in wartime would scarcely attract timid persons. The late date at which the expedition was ready to sail almost made it unnecessary, but this was not realized in San Francisco. Though Santa Anna had fled 2 months before, Zerman did not hear of the flight before sailing. He did not know at that time either that Blancart had finally proclaimed for Alvarez, nor that almost all Mexican ports were in rebel hands. Even if all this had been known, the fact that there were still strong conservative forces in the field would probably have led the partners to discount the changes in the course of the war, and they would have dispatched the ship to protect their investment. Finally, on October 11th, Captain Samuel Dennison sailed the overladen Archibald Gracie through the Golden Gate. 3 days later, on the high seas, he turned the ship over to Admiral Zerman, who raised the Mexican flag and declared that the vessel was now the property of the Provisional Mexican Government. All on board would be protected, but would be under his orders. One crewman, who later admitted that he was considering service under Alvarez already, said there was no resistance to Zerman's command. Then, for 2 weeks, the heavily burdened vessel sailed southward, completing the voyage of some 1,500 miles in 18 days, and anchoring off Cape San Lucas on the 29th. Here the expedition took on wood and water and learned of Santa Anna's flight. This news led to a crucial change in Zerman's plans, for he knew that upon arrival at Acapulco he would lose all chance of carrying out the desired naval operations, especially since only General Blanco in Mazatlan challenged rebel control of the entire west coast. The commission of September 17th, which he had probably dictated himself, ordered him to examine the ports which had adopted the plan of Ayutla and to blockade those which had not accepted it. When he learned of Blancart's recent conversion, Zerman decided to go to La Paz, examine the port, and seek reinforcements before approaching the mainland. The sub-prefect of San Jose del Cabo, a short distance from Cape San Lucas, reported the ship's arrival to Blancart and declared excitedly that there were 500 filibusters on board. The governor then ordered the rancheros to rise again and defend the peninsula from another Yankee invasion. After sending a force to the Cape, he dispatched a warning to Colonel Oñate at distant Santo Tomas, in which he said there had been no troops at the Cape and that the filibusters had shown the intention of taking possession of the territory. Oñate was ordered to send word of the invasion to General Wool in San Francisco to cut off reinforcements. In spite of its urgency, this news did not reach San Francisco until the evening of December 10th. Meanwhile, Zerman had left the Cape. Blancart withdrew his forces to La Paz, feeling that the vulnerable city would surely be attacked. There, some 700 citizens and soldiers came together, poorly armed, but determined to defend the territory, whatever might have been the number of the filibusters. Admiral Zerman, off the Cape, added to his squadron the whaling bark Rebecca Adams under Captain Thomas Andrews. This ship was chartered in the name of the Alvarez government as an auxiliary transport, but was allowed to fly the United States flag. After transferring part of his crew to the new vessel, Zerman led the two-ship squadron about the entrance to the Gulf of California for 2 weeks, capturing the Mexican pilot boat Cavitena, which he took to La Paz in the afternoon of November 13th.